All right, 25 minutes before 10 o'clock. This morning we had a story about a young man who drove, how far did he drive? 200-something miles to buy some Krispy Kreme donuts, right?
Yep.
And in Minnesota. And then he brought the Krispy Kreme donuts back to Minnesota and he was selling them for a profit.
Yes.
That is called capitalism, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you can't get it any more simple than that. Now, the Krispy Kreme donut people didn't like him doing it for some reason. I'm not sure why. They don't have a Krispy Kreme donut shop in his state, right?
Right.
In the whole
Not
state.
in his state.
What's wrong with that? How'd that ever happen? Martin Lowy is in the studio. I'm looking forward to getting to know Martin. He is a lawyer, a banker, an entrepreneur. He has interacted with Martin Luther King Jr., wow, Robert Frost, William O. Douglas, John F. Kennedy, Henry Steele Commager. You love to cook, you're a writer, and you have a best-selling book called Capitalism for Democrats, Why the Country Needs It Now. And let me put the camera on you so that we can see what you look like and say good morning. How are you? Nice to meet you.
I'm great. Nice to be here.
And we already hit it off. You said you're from the Bronx.
I am from the Bronx.
Where do you live now?
I live in Lecanto,
Oh, you live in Lecanto.
Citrus County.
That's a nice area.
Yeah, I've been living there for 16 years.
Yeah.
I still think I'm a New Yorker, but I'm also a Floridian.
Me too. Me too. I like both places. So let me ask you something. A lawyer and a banker are not necessarily capitalists because it depends on, who your clients are, right?
Yeah, to some extent, sure.
Yeah.
And in fact, in some ways, some of my clients weren't necessarily capitalists in the ordinary sense because they ran mutual institutions, which are more like cooperatives. And I still like cooperatives, but they can't do it all.
They can't, right? Whenever you hear anybody who has a socialist idea, you have to ask yourself, or they have to ask themselves, really, well, how is it going to be paid for? There has to be some capitalism somewhere on the line, right?
Well, and that's a very good point, Larry. And people ask me, why don't I spend a lot of time in the book bashing socialism? And I say, well, it's easy to bash socialism, but that's not what our young people are about. They're not looking at the really bad kinds of socialism. You ask them, well, name a country where do they have good socialism?
Right.
And they're going to say Sweden.
That's right.
And then we look at Sweden, and I have a section in the book that looks at Sweden. And Sweden has many wonderful things about it. One of the amazing things is that they have collective bargaining effectively throughout the whole country. And that is relatively easy for them because they have a almost homogeneous population, and it is smaller than metropolitan New York.
Right.
But it's a wonderful thing.
Why is the homogeneous population part of that important?
Because people have the same background and tend to trust each other. Where we have different backgrounds, we tend to trust less.
Okay.
And even if we look back at when my parents, your parents, my wife's parents came to the U.S. Early in the 20th century, or that is their parents, there was strife between the Italians and the Irish, between the Jews and the Irish.
Yeah, sure. It's been part of humanity, right?
It was just part of the thing, part of the deal. But now, we after a while, we get assimilated. We all get mixed up. I'm married to an Italian. It doesn't make any difference.
Let me tell you something. When they had that period in our history, recent couple of years ago, when they were doing Occupy Wall Street. Okay, Robert and I, we did our best to call and speak to one of the kids that was actually sleeping in a tent or whatever they were doing. They could not articulate what they wanted. They just wanted to be out there protesting. And I said, well, how are we going to support what you're doing if we don't know what you want? And then one of them said, well, we're sick and tired of the corporations. Okay, so what do you want? What do you want done? I don't know. What are you talking on? I'm talking on an Apple phone. Well, that's made by a corporation. So what happened is then they got some kid on who was a little smarter, and he said, we're not against capitalism. We're against crony capitalism. Help me out with this. What do you think they're trying to say to us?
Well, I think to begin with, the great financial crisis was a shock to the system of people who were in their teens and early 20s in 2008. And they haven't got over it. I'm not suggesting they should get over it. I'm suggesting they should learn from it and move on.
Learn, yeah.
But that seemed to be a terrible loss as a result of capitalism. And it was a part of capitalism that made that happen, that is excess borrowing.
Right.
And borrowing is a part of capitalism, but it is also a part of every other economic system in the history of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, the first borrowings were done by sovereigns. Okay, why did sovereigns have to borrow? Well, they had to make war. And they didn't have enough gold in the coffers to pay the soldiers to make war. So they borrowed, usually from their own people. Do you think the sovereigns always paid it back?
I doubt it.
No, they didn't. So we have this borrowing problem that's gone on
Yeah, that is a problem. Yeah.
for a very long time.
Yeah.
And we don't really know what is excess borrowing. We just know that the point comes when something bad happens and people can't repay. And that's what happened in 2008. And it left a lot of people unemployed. A lot of people got kicked out of their homes. It was a terrible thing. Now, these young people, being idealistic, tend to blame it on the corporations, just as you said, Larry.
Right.
And I saw one of those encampments in downtown New York 4 or 5 years ago when I was downtown. And I didn't talk to any of the young people, but clearly they were very earnest about what they wanted to do, but they didn't really know what it was they wanted to do.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so my book is designed to explain
That's
what's good about capitalism, why it will work for almost everybody, why we can have a safety net that helps out and works for some of the people that it doesn't work for, and that all that can be within capitalism.
Yeah. Give us a 101. Give us like a kindergarten version of the definition. What is capitalism? And why? Let me ask you this first before you do that. Why is it capitalism for Democrats, not for Americans?
I started out noodling with a kind of an essay about how both Democrats and Republicans have lost their way in terms of understanding what capitalism is.
Yeah, right.
And I tried it out on a friend of mine who happens to be a fairly leftish Democrat, and he found it quite confused and confusing.
Really?
Even though he's a brilliant guy.
Okay.
He's a professor, so, he's a little bit up in the clouds.
Very-
Gotcha.
Anyway, but so I went back and I said, I'm trying to do too much here. I really should focus on the Democrats because the Democrats are having a big primary coming up, and they have choices between different types of economic systems that people are advocating. And so I called it Capitalism for Democrats. But the reviews all say it should be read by Republicans too. And my Republican son says, yes, he's read it, and yes, other Republicans should read it too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Now, the 101. The 101 is actually fun for me because I was at my son's house in Houston, and my granddaughter was 12 years old. And I'm talking about the book. I was in the middle of writing it. And Katerina says to me, Grandpa, tell me about it so I can understand it. Why does capitalism work? How does capitalism work? I was a little dumbstruck. But the next morning I sat down and I wrote something that's in the book. And I wrote it for Katerina, and I tried it out on her, and I said, does this work? And she said, yes, Grandpa. Okay, here it is. It's the cornflakes example. You go to the store, and cornflakes is on your list. Now, being like many Americans, you've always eaten Kellogg's.
Right.
I certainly grew up eating Kellogg's. But I'm there in the store, and I look, and there's a generic brand of cornflakes, and it's $1 less.
Right.
For the same amount. I said, gosh, I ought to try this. I mean, why should I be a slave to Kellogg's? Okay. So
Just don't try it with mac and cheese, because you're going to regret it.
And so I buy this box, I take it home, and I try it. Now, one of two things can happen. Either I'll like it and say, I'll never buy Kellogg's again, or I'll say, I've always been right, this stuff is terrible.
Okay.
Either one. Okay, so take whichever one you want, start with it. Let's say I decide that I like generic. Well, I'm going to go on Facebook. I'm going to tell all my friends, you can save $1. Buy generic. Okay, well, that meme goes all around the country, and all of a sudden, Kellogg's cornflakes sales are going down. Kellogg's as a corporation, has some decisions to make. It has to decide, can we lower our prices? Can we improve our supply chain? Or should we just let things take their course and we'll sell less, which has a big effect on its supply chain, because the farmer and the aggregator and everybody and all along the line, they're going to sell less to Kellogg.
That's right.
Okay.
You're a good teacher.
Now, suppose it goes the other way. I say, I really like Kellogg's, I've been right all along, and I tell all my friends, online, etc. All of a sudden, nobody's buying generic. Nobody's buying generic, and so generic has a problem, whoever generic is. Do they try to improve? What do they do? How do they change their marketing? And that has an impact all down the line on generic supply chain. Okay, now all those things that happen, those impacts on all of those businesses are caused by the decision that you, the consumer, make regarding which product you like and what you're willing to pay for it.
There you go.
And that's what capitalism is about.
Okay, absolutely true. How do you pay the police department?
Well, the police department...
Or the fire department, or the garbage collector.
Those are all things that capitalism does not do well. And there are what we call them basically, or economists call them basically, externalities. And I have a discussion of those things and what you try to do in government to make up for the fact that capitalism doesn't do these things well. So you have government, which taxes and has a police force and pays the police. Now, there's corruption in everything.
That's right.
There's corruption in corporate world,
Right.
and there's corruption in the government world.
Right.
It seems like it's even worse in the government world because governments tend to a kind of cronyism among themselves. So we do have to worry about that, but we have no choice. I mean, we have to have a police department. We have to have a fire department.
Right.
We also have to worry about it in the business world, because we can start with the very basic little things. Suppose I have a customer. Customer is not an individual. The customer buys for Macy's. Okay, so she's a Macy's buyer. and I take her to Vegas for a weekend jaunt. And there's no quid pro quo. I just take
You wish
her,
there was, right?
yeah, right. But I take her to Vegas for a weekend jaunt. Why? It's relationship building. And it just happens that she comes now and buys $500,000 gross of the socks that I sell. Is that graft? I think it is. Well, lots of people think it isn't, but I'm starting at the lowest level.
Okay, yeah.
Sure.
And then you can go higher and higher where the quid pro quo is stated, and then you can finally get to what we call crony capitalism that you mentioned before, Larry. I have a couple of sections on crony capitalism in the book, and it's a very dangerous thing, in my judgment. Russia is dominated by crony capitalism. Even as we tried to help Russia to become a capitalist nation, they didn't have the background, and they descended into bribery, crony capitalism. I saw a lot of it in the 90s when it happens that I represented a Russian bank trying to open an office in the United States, and through them, I could see what was going on with the oligarchs and the crony capitalism there. Well, we have a bit of it here now, in my judgment.
We sure do.
And when you have very wealthy people running the country, they tend to do things to help other very wealthy people. And that's crony capitalism.
That is. That's what it is.
And that's not good for us for two reasons, basically. One, it gives capitalism a bad name, makes people resent it. And number two,
Correct.
it actually does skew some of the profits going to, in a funnel,
Sure.
to this group of cronies, instead of being spread out to all the small business people and the people who work in the country. So it's a bad thing.
I love the fact that you are teaching this in such a way, and the book is obviously going to do the same thing. I mean, it's a wonderful way that you have of teaching. Let me ask you this. Would like, if there was no crony capitalism, if it was just capitalism, would you feel that America became great because we had a capitalist economy with social programs like the police department, the fire department, the garbage collectors, and even government in general, aside from the fact that there might be some corrupt people in government and in the businesses?
Yes, you can't do one without the other.
Yeah, has to happen.
You can't have one without the other. Anyway, as I say early in the book, capitalism does not regulate itself. It needs to be regulated in many ways. I discuss some of them. One of the ones that I discuss at some length is the antitrust laws.
All right, that's right.
And people may find that a bit esoteric, but it's important in order to keep customer choice.
And competition.
And competition.
Sure.
Competition is important because it keeps customer choice and because it keeps prices down.
And it keeps the product improving.
And keeps the product improving, no question about that. And if I can digress from that for 1 second, I published an article this weekend in something called seekingalpha.com. It's an investment website that I publish sometimes in. And it's about environmental investing for the long term. And I talk about the choices that we have to make as investors, those of us who do have a little bit of money and invest. We have choices as to whether we want to think about the environment in terms of the companies we invest in. We don't have to, but we ought, at least each person ought to have a policy.
I think you're right, yeah.
Each person ought to have a policy, and science is going to be the key to how we live better in our environment, just as science is the key to how we live better in all different ways. And I am advocating a National Institute for Environmental Science, just like the National Institutes of Health. Anyway, that's a little bit of a digression from the book.
It is.
But it's in the same spirit as the book.
And in addition to what I would say, because I like that idea, but I also think there should be also an oversight so that we as investors know if we're investing in something that has a side business that we might be ethically opposed to. One of the things that is in the news a lot is this cyber currency stuff. And they're all over the place. Even Glenn Beck in the afternoon, well, he doesn't do it anymore, but he used to promote, what's that thing called again? Crypto coin?
Crypto coin.
Whatever that is,
Cryptocurrency.
Oh, there are lots of them.
Bitcoin. It's called Bitcoin. Okay.
Bitcoin, okay.
So that's when he was promoting. He stopped doing it. But we had articles. I even wrote him a letter. I said, Glenn, what are you doing? This is people are paying for children prostitutes with this Bitcoin, and they're getting away with it because it's not traceable, right? And that's why the prices, the value is going up. So I don't want to make money off of somebody else's murder or somebody else's sexual abuse. I don't want to do that. So that's what I mean. If we can invest in things that are environmentally sound and also that are ethically sound.
I think everybody ought to have that choice and the information to make that choice.
Correct. Yeah.
Happens that I wrote an article a few months ago on that, also at seekingalpha.com, and if you look at seekingalpha.com and look up my name, Martin Lowy, you can find my article on that, because, Larry, I'm in total agreement that we need disclosure of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The book, I want to make sure, oh gosh, I wish we had more time with you. The book is called Capitalism for Democrats, Why the Country Needs It Now. Martin Lowy, you are an amazing teacher, and you just gave us an amazing radio program that anybody who's been listening to this walks out of here with, the Congresswoman, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Yes.
I think she's wanting to do good things for the country, but she hasn't studied enough. And I think just one of your books could help her. Can you sit with her for like a half hour?
But she's from Queens. I'm from the Bronx. How could we ever get together?
No, you'd be fine. You'd be fine. You'd be fine. But I really think that's the problem is, and you said it, that everybody seems to think that all capitalism is crony capitalism. And it's not. We sell radio advertising, right? We make a little more on each ad when you add it all up, with if we're lucky, to pay for the electricity and to pay for the staff and everybody else. So there's a little bit of a profit at the end of it. That's fine. There's nothing crony about it.
No, no. I've had a number of small businesses. Sometimes I've made money. Once I lost money, a good bit of money. That's capitalism.
That is.
And I don't regret having done it, because it was a fascinating thing. The hardest 6 years of my life, and I lost what I put into it.
Oh, my.
But I learned so much about people, about the world, that I'm still happy with it.
So let me say, I found your book on, oh my gosh, we're so close to the end. I found it on Amazon. You've got 5-star reviews, so we can buy it there. Do you have a different website you'd like to direct us to?
It's a simple website, capitalismfordemocrats.com.
All right, awesome. And you live in Lecanto. How long have you lived there?
16 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
It is.
Wow. Well, Martin, don't be a stranger. If you write another book, come on in and talk about it. We might call you just to have an expert, like when we have one of these political discussions.
Well, hey, coming over here is easy. You guys are fun. I'm delighted to do it.
Martin, thank you so much. All right, so it's martinlowy.com?
No, Capitalism for
I'm sorry.
Capitalismfordemocrats.com.
I'm sorry. Robin even has it in front of me. Capitalismfordemocrats.com. It's an honor, Martin, to have you in the studio. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back. This is WOCA Ocala.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM.